So welcome everybody to our coaching and trauma conversation with Julia Vaughan Smith. This conversation we'll be having this evening is primarily for the interest of those who are transpersonal coaching students or those who have an interest in transpersonal coaching. And that should be just about everybody in this particular community. But although we'll be talking about trauma in the context of coaching, you should, based on your own background and interests, soon identify how you can take this knowledge and the ideas and transfer or translate them into your own area of particular interest. So without holding back, I'd like to welcome our conversation partner this evening, Julia Vaughan Smith. Julia is an executive coach and supervisor for over 25 years and was practicing integrative and humanistic psychotherapist until 2019. In the last 14 years, she has focused on understanding and working with trauma as a therapist and coach. Her book, Coaching and Trauma, was published in 2019, and many readers have said how valuable they found it, including myself. Julia has talked with many groups of coaches since its publication and runs a very successful masterclass with Jenny Rogers, together with other online events. She has a background in organizational and leadership development, working primarily in the health services in the UK and internationally. Having also held senior roles in the NHS, she lives in East Devon in the UK, near the sea.
Well, first of all, can I say hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm really grateful for that. And I'm a bit overawed about how many of you there are. So I'm just doing a bit of self-regulation here. But it's lovely to see you all and to sort of take you in on various screens. So thank you so much. And I can see so many of you sitting in sunshine, which is also really nice to see. So welcome. Thank you.
So my first question for Julia this evening is, what is the most constructive and ethical approach in coaching when trauma presents in the session?
So constructive and ethical approach in coaching when trauma presents. What a question to start with. Let's be clear about what we talk about trauma, then I'll talk about what's constructive and ethical. So when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about the lasting impact on our neurophysiology of our nervous system being overwhelmed. So that's what I'm talking about. It's unprocessed and undigested past experience that is still operating in the present, maybe in behavior patterns or emotional patterns or neuropathway patterns. So that's what I'm talking about. So constructive and ethical approach, I think, is firstly that I think now in coaching, we do all have to have a sort of a working understanding of how trauma operates. Doesn't mean to say we necessarily have to work with trauma, we have to do lots of trauma stuff, but I think it's like so much that we have in coaching. It's one of those fields of reference now that I think we do have to know something about. And I'm happy to say why a bit later or now, whatever. And constructive, I think it's about, we don't need to be scared of it. We can be with it. We can be honourable and ethical in our practice as long as we stay fully grounded and present in ourselves. The problems come when our own trauma dynamics get triggered by the environment, by the client's story, and then our own fight and flight kicks in. We might be aware of it, we might not, and we find ourselves moving away a bit from the grounded basis of our coaching. And we then might get into defenses, actions that try to resolve our own anxiety, but actually they don't really help the coaching. So the more we can be highly tuned, as I know many of you will be, and for me it's still a constant learning of when I'm not, of when we've shifted out of this absolute attunement, because the groundwork for any trauma, and I assume that most people have trauma to a greater or less extent, and we can talk about why and how about that. So the greatest thing, and is central to all coaching too, and I know will be central to your practice, is safety. It is the relationship. It is the attunement. It is our own self-regulation. And so to be ethical and constructive, we just need to hold ourselves in that place with those qualities, acting in that way, because then we can be present for the client, whatever it is they're bringing and whatever it is they're experiencing with their own emotional and physiological response. Pause. Yeah, so I don't know if that has answered a question, but it's got some, it started us off anyway.
It's a great start, Julia. Thank you so much. So what you've pointed to is that many people, perhaps most of us, including those of us who do this work, may have been confronted by experiences in life that may leave us at least somewhat traumatized with those experiences. And so if we as coaches, or let's just say facilitators holding the space for somebody in a coaching or therapeutic context, feel something's going on within us, if we've become activated, what are the first signs that we should look out for or sense in clients and ourselves that lets us know trauma has presented in the session?
Well, I think if you're talking about trauma presenting being a slightly more agitated state, or a more dissociated state, or a more controlling state, you know, those are signs of trauma too. Those are defensive signs of trauma. So, and others as well. But if we just take those three, so increased agitation, control being a key issue, or you know, that there's some disturbance going on within ourselves, it really is about our attunement to our body. You all know the vagus nerve runs down from the base down into our whole body, below the diaphragm and across, and engages all organ. And it carries the information from our body up and down. And the trauma response or the re-triggering response of agitation, or, you know, as we come into the controlling ones, is this re-stimulation of these trauma pathways that probably were laid down there and then. So they're in the here and now, but they were there and then, depending on when the trauma experience happened. So the more we are in tune with our body and the more we can sense it, and we might just catch ourselves. It might be that, you know, we catch our breathing being a bit shallower. It might be we catch ourselves being a bit more hunched. We catch ourselves being a bit more pushing into the client, a bit more directive, or a bit more, don't want anything to do with this. You know, we just catch ourselves in those movements. So the more attuned we are with ourselves, the more we're able to catch ourselves sooner. And sometimes we don't catch it very soon, but we have to be compassionate to ourselves too. And that's what the value of supervision is, that we learn something was going on and I didn't catch it then. We can resolve it. It's not something that we just need to be compassionately inquiring about ourselves. So that's the thing about ourselves. If we hear ourselves going into rescuing, we hear ourselves going into directing, if we hear ourselves going into avoiding, we hear ourselves going into shutting down a client, we know that something is going on for us. As well as this sight, our body changes, our breathings change, we become more tense. In our clients, you know, the first sign really is how they look. You know, what do we notice about their face and their colour and their general body? You know, when they walk in, what do we notice about how they're holding their body, how they're relating to us? Are they present with us really or not really? Are they a bit blank with us, or are they overactive with us? What do we notice at those basic sort of levels? And I'm sure you all do notice how people walk in, how they sit down, how they start, All those things are part of it. And then other signs that trauma might be around is obviously if somebody is being re-traumatized by the environment they're in, then their fight and flight might be activated. Now, for many people who've been traumatized in there and then with attachment trauma or childhood domestic abuse or sexual abuse trauma, often the fight and flight mechanisms are they're not set at a sort of calm, grounded level. So if this is a calm, grounded level, they're set up here and it feels normal because that's how it's always been. And that could be the same for us as well, of course. So it doesn't take much then to push that back up even further. And some people, because of their trauma, have lost contact with what it really feels to be in a calm, grounded state. It doesn't actually compute. What do you mean? What are you talking about? So we can sense that sense of how regulated is this client? What's happening to their breathing? What's happening to what they're saying? Are they, how fast are they talking? Or are they in a slightly switched off state? Are they dissociated? Are they a bit numb? If we ask them something about themselves, are they a bit numb? I say, I don't really know. I can't tell. Or are they just not really with us? So those ways in which we can tell. And other ways we can tell is if a client is wanting to, if there's some change they want to make, but actually things keep getting in the way of making those changes, despite all our brilliant coaching, then, we know there's something else going on. This isn't that the client's just being difficult. I know we wouldn't think that, but, or that we're being poor coaches. It's that something's going on here, that there's other parts to play here. And sometimes what clients want to change are their longer term patterns of how they've come to survive trauma. And the only way they can really change that is to be able to be, and not all clients can do this, and the environment doesn't always allow them to. So it's not a failure of coaching if we can't do that. If they can make some connection with what the emotion is that underlies it. Are they able to make connection with fear or shame or terror? And not everyone is, and it's not always appropriate. So I say that cautiously because it very much depends on how safe the client's able to feel with us. And if they're not able to feel safe with us, then we have to be very cautious and just keep with the relationship, keep with the attunement. So, those are some of the ways in which we can tell if trauma's around, both within us and on our clients. And I'll pause because you might have other questions. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Jules. That's very helpful. And so you've raised many examples of what those who are coaches in our audience here have probably confronted at some stage in coaching sessions, whether this is something they've seen arising for the client or experienced within themselves or both. And you've also pointed to the vagus nerve and the work of Stephen Porges. And so he speaks a lot about co-regulation in the sort of therapeutic space. The container is what we refer to in transpersonal coaching, the held space. So how would you advise coaches then respond to any of these phenomena that might arise in the session in order to co-regulate with the client and to re-establish that safety in which the coaching process can then unfold further?
Well, if we think about co-regulation, our nervous systems here, even now, are all resonating with each other to some extent. So if we're in the room with a client, our nervous systems are resonating. They might be jangling or they might be in resonance, but there's something going on between our nervous systems that doesn't come up through the frontal lobe and out through our voices. It's going on in our bodies already. So the first place is to do as much as we can, our best as we can, to regulate us, to be regulated ourselves. And you know what I mean by that, and you explain it. we're regulated, we're in a calm state, whereas Stephen Porges calls a sort of social connection state. You know, we're calm, our voice is a warm, our face is warm and welcoming. We can offer safety. It's that calm sense we feel, that we feel grounded in our body. We've got Thomas Hubel talks about this, and others, are sort of, you know, a good integrated line between our brain, our emotion, our body, which we get in a grounded state that we can feel. And trauma cuts across that. So if we are triggered, or if we haven't done enough, or we haven't worked hard enough to do that, clients can't always do that because this is quite new for them. You know, having that congruence between mind, body, and emotion is our place to start. Because unless we can do that, then we can't offer a regulated, co-regulated space with our clients. So if we can start from that point, then you have tools that you can use. You know, some clients, they may need help with breathing exercises. They may need to understand what's going on. Some clients like to know what's going on. Other clients aren't bothered. They just like know what to do about it. And you will have that sensitivity to your clients to know what would be the right when for them. But then it is about breathing, about encouraging them, see if they can come into this space with you. Can they calm themselves a bit? Is that possible? And all sorts of techniques can help with that. And you will have your own for doing that. And then there's a space, an opportunity for our nervous systems to travel at the same speed. Thomas Hubel talks about it like being like two trains running in parallel, that they actually go at the same speed. So you can talk across the track to each other. And if one is going faster than the other or slower than the other, we can't do that. So it's about trying to get us both into that sort of more of a resonance. And as you will know from all your experience, that's not always possible with some clients. But that doesn't mean we should do anything different from actually regulate ourselves and offer that regulation into the space with our clients. Because if we stop doing that, then we're not offering an invitation into safety.
That makes so much sense, Julia. Thank you. It also, I believe, supports working in the here and now, bringing the client into an awareness of what is present in their bodies, what is present in their life. And of course, we've been discussing issues that potentially have their roots in the client's past. Trauma is probably something that happened there and then, which we are processing in the here and now. Now, in transpersonal coaching, because we deliberately utilize skills to enable the client to be in a very present and resourceful state, in which they are embodied, yet open and receptive, in which they should hopefully gain a higher degree of access to resources that can usually be identified in an expanded state of consciousness, which is a characteristic of transpersonal coaching, that we will deliberately utilize skills such as applied open awareness to help the client have an expanded sense of self in which they can access resources that are normally outside of conscious awareness. However, when we do this, the client also tends to open a door to the unconscious. And what might reveal itself through that door may very well be a lot of the there and then. So, of course, there might be a gravitational pull, because something captures attention and off they go into the there and then, and suddenly both coach and client are confronting memories from the client's past, and maybe the client is associating into those memories and getting in touch with those difficult feelings of the past. So the coach's job, in my understanding, is then to bring them back into the here and now in order to process what they've been confronted. But before we do in transpersonal coaching, immediately tug them back into their bodies, into the space, we give them a sufficient amount of time to identify what is relevant about the past, what is there for them to learn, what is there for them to realize so that they can release and be fully present. So we find ourselves in that sort of slippery space or gray zone where coaching and therapy intersect quite commonly in transpersonal coaching. So what advice or cautions might you have for coaches who work in this way, who might be walking that fine line between coaching and therapy?
Well, I don't really know where the boundary is between coaching and therapy, actually. So, well, that's a rather crass statement. I mean, I think it's not so easy to determine, because I think it depends so much on the individual practitioners. But I think it's the point is a fair one. I don't think sitting with the past and the present is necessarily therapy. Let me put it like that. I mean, I think it's perfectly part of coaching. I think the key for all of us, whatever sort of coaching we do, is our own supervision. And because I think that holds us in a space, the reflective space, that allows us to learn about our own responses as well. And I think what can happen is, I think one of the problems is that we can get a bit triggered. I mean, I know, you know, sometimes we are and often we're not, but it'll vary between all of us, and depending on how much experience we've had, depending on how many people we've sat with over the years, you know, makes a big difference. But if something in the there and then of a client just hooks in something about our there and then, we will not necessarily be aware that we have gone into, for example, a rescuing position, for example, or an avoidant shutting down position, for example, or that part of us has become numb, for example. So that's why afterwards it's really helpful to have supervision, to say, oh God, I see what happened, I understand, you know, we can then harness our own learning from that. And that's what I said earlier about really our own compassionate inquiry into ourselves. So I think supervision is a really valuable tool here, whether that's with, you know, experienced supervisor, with a peer supervisor, with just an opportunity to sit with and reflect with is very valuable. I think if change can only happen in the present, so the past is important in terms of how it's still resonating within us, unprocessed, so it's resonating within us. And often the stories have become very not necessarily well told, some are well told, but how we try and make sense of experience is not always the full narrative. What's important is, how do we experience it? What happened after? Who was around for us? What happened? How do we find safety? What do we do? Because we can find some resourcefulness in that as well. So I think it's also then we bring it back into the present. So right now, how do you feel right now when you talk about this? What's happening as you talk with me about this? What's happening in your body? Let's see, what's it feel like? You say you feel agitated. Tell me what that feels like. You know, we're engaging with that processing in the here and now. I think there are some clients, you know, depend entirely on your own experience and education as coaches, and that's very variable. But I think there are some clients who have a very complex trauma biography. By that I mean a combination of life experience, you know, severe illness, hospitalization as children, terrible birth as a baby, whatever, plus unattuned parenting and attachment trauma, and then maybe also violence in the home and sexual abuse trauma, and then maybe also some trauma later in life as adults because they're so vulnerable, then I think the holding that clients need sometimes is more than the structure of coaching can offer. And I'm quite cautious about it because I know coaching is a very varied thing. So both the structure and the holding that coaches can give to people in that position. So I'm not saying never, but I'm just saying I think it's something for us to be very aware of about our own capabilities and qualities of holding and being with people whose trauma history actually has so many layers and so many complexities, and actually they're not able to meet you well in a holding space because that trauma is cutting across their capacity to do that, and that how the time we have and the skills we have are not enough to bring them into some sort of coherence. So I'm quite cautious about all that because I think it varies very greatly. But I suppose that's my best answer for now to that question. But I'm happy to take other questions about it, obviously.
Oh, that's really valuable. So if such a complexity shows itself, and I think it will, especially those of us who are doing transpersonal coaching, because we may tend, some of us anyway, to attract those clients who see value in this transpersonal perspective and maybe are reluctant to go to a therapist for whatever idea that they have. And I'm currently in conversation with a colleague who's in Ukraine. And we have extended ourselves as a group of transpersonal coaches to offer free coaching to the humanitarian aid people who are involved in supporting people in the Ukraine directly affected by the war. And interestingly, we have found it exceedingly difficult to find clients. So I'm behind the scenes trying to connect these coaches who are volunteering with clients. But what I found out from my colleague is that as a culture, he says, the Ukrainian people don't go for therapy. They speak to family members about issues, and they don't go to get the help that they could benefit from, whether that be therapy and or coaching. And so there may very well be, and I'm sure there are others who might feel, well, coaching feels like something that's more accessible. There's sort of a positive connotation to it. I don't want to be seen or known as somebody who's going for therapy, but there's this coach. Now, finally, they lay all their cards on the table and the coach is confronted with this degree of complexity. If, as a transpersonal coach, we are trained to hold space for any and all types of phenomena that arise, because that is one of the characteristics of the transpersonal coaching approach, hold space for whatever comes up and maintain that safe container to the best of our capacity. Nevertheless, we may not be clinically or medically trained to support clients through that degree of complexity. So in the session then, what is the most appropriate way to respond? Because we can't throw that client out. They're not going to go to the therapist, yet they need help, and we can hold space, hopefully. So any advice along those lines would be appreciated.
Absolutely. And to remember that, developmental trauma, whether that's attachment trauma or sexual abuse or violence abuse trauma in childhood, there's an element of betrayal. So we need to be very careful not to mirror that in coaching. And I'm not suggesting we would, but I'm just saying, so this idea of saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't work with you, but that would be potentially re-traumatizing, and inappropriate is not necessary. I think you can work with what's present. And I think, and avoid any temptation to push and work with what isn't present, is present, but actually isn't fully present in the client. You might have heard the history and you work, you've got a sense, I think there's something there I could deal with. just work with what's present here and now with the clients. What's really present in the client, what's present between us, what's the client experiencing right now, how does that feel for them, how does it feel for them feeling that with us? I mean, this is all, I'm sure, standard how you work, so forgive me, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your coaching, I'm just answering the question in a way I can. Then, if you're staying with the client in the here and now, right now, with how they are with you, and you are grounded and with them present, then that's fine. That's what we can do. If the client then says, well, I've got this, you know, there's often ideas that that some people need more help than we can give, or clients think they need more help than we can give them. But I think we just have to sit with that and say, well, if there was something, what would be helpful for you? You know, we can do that. We don't have to solve anything, that they're resourceful. You know, we have to, however traumatized people are, they're still resourceful. They still have resources. And as coaches, that's what we're talking to, their real resourceful self. We're not talking to their traumatized shame or their traumatized panic or their defensive mechanisms. We're talking to that part of them that has a sense of what all this is. Might not be able to make sense of it all, but actually has some sense of it. And that's where we're aiming our coaching. Because if we aim our coaching at the defensive mechanisms, it won't work. And we can get caught up in that and it won't go anywhere. Coaching will get stuck. But if we're aiming at the real resourcefulness in a client, and we hold that belief, which I'm sure you will, that this client is resourceful, we can help them. Now, the thing about coaching, about trauma rather, it's sometimes it results in people not being able to trust their resourcefulness, because maybe they've been told they didn't have any, or the resourcefulness they had that they used to try and get away or fight back was actually perpetrated on. So they can come to both mistrust and not believe in their own resourcefulness, but we can help hold them in that space and say, you know, you're resourceful. How did you survive that? What did you draw on to survive? Here you are. And also, you know, often trauma shows itself at the age at which it happens. So, you know, I'm doing this arc. So if you think, you know, birth or conception through to wherever we are now, you know, various times on that, whatever traumatizing experience we have, some of the things held inside us are from that age. So again, we can be with clients and say something like, you know, now, because we're now older, we've got more resources, we've learnt more, we've traveled in life, and we can hold that 3-year-old or 8-year-old between us. So it's not just me as coach holding it, but you, the idea is that the client learns and trusts that they can do that. They can provide that whole holding that maybe they never had. We can mirror that, obviously, by how we hold. But really, it's about the aim of it all is that they can do that for themselves. I've sort of forgotten the question now. Sorry, I got carried away. So I'll pause.
You've answered the question beautifully. You know, how do we respond to these phenomena when they arise? And I think you've spoken to how coaches are coaching the client's healthy self, as you put it in your book, which we refer to as the authentic self in transpersonal coaching. And that is the part of the person that is not apart from them. Absolutely. It is the whole person, which contains the traumatized part and the survival part that have come into the fore. And of course, I'm referring now to page 37 in your book, where you've got this wonderful diagram that shows the split in the psyche of how traumatized parts become split off from the healthy or the authentic self, how a survival part comes to the rescue of that traumatized part. And in coaching, we're coaching the healthy part or aspect of the client, the authentic self. So how do we ensure that we're actually addressing the healthy, authentic self, and that we haven't slipped into trying to coach the survival self or the traumatized part?
Well, let's also trauma healing, just to say, imagine these three parts, and various models. Richard Schwartz has a slightly different model, but the same sort of thing. And you're talking about, you know, this sense of that there's a self within us which is not affected by the trauma, that has a sense of the whole. But that we know in trauma, if you're familiar with the polyvagal model and what happens in flight and freeze, you know, we got there, that at the freeze stage, the emotions of the trauma experience at the age at which they had are sort of frozen and numb within us. They stay a bit out of reach. The survival parts, the defensive mechanisms, try and override the anxiety, the fear and fight and flight mechanisms that haven't been resolved. So they're a response to trying to calm those down one way or the other. And trauma healing is about being able to safely and carefully integrate those trauma feelings back into our whole self. So in your sense, back into the authentic self, in my sense, back into the healthy self, which means that it releases some of the agitation that the defensive mechanisms are there to defend against. But to answer your question more specifically, the trauma feelings need containment and being held. So we don't need to coach them. We just need them to know they're being held here, that it's safe, that's safe, and to say, but now you're safe. That's not happening to you now. You're here in this room with me now. You know, we're trying to talk in the present, not to talk about, use the past tense so much, to hold them in the present. In the more defensive mechanisms, the thing about defensive mechanisms is they have a slightly more driven edge to them. I must, I have to, I should, I can't. They have a slightly more driven edge. And sometimes you hear this very clearly in clients, very clearly indeed. They say, no, you don't understand, I've got to do this. It's not how I hear it, but you know, you wouldn't say that, I know, but you know, there's something, that there's a driven quality. It comes, you can feel the fight or flight within it. If you're truly sensitive, you might feel it within yourself. You might feel a resonance with that. You might, oh, that's interesting, I'm feeling. And you might share that. You say, that's interesting, I'm feeling a bit more agitated, you know, or however you say it, you know, you can use that feedback in the here and now. So those defensive mechanisms, which tend to be, you know, how we've chosen to live our lives, tend to prevent us being in relationship with people that might cause us harm again, or to keep us safe by controlling our lives, or to keep us numb by addiction or overwork or whatever. These, you know, these came out. I mean, Gabor Mate calls these, which I think it was Gabor Mate, it might have been Thomas Hoover, but one of them called these our childhood heroes, which I think is a really compassionate, wonderful way to think about it. These aren't the bad guys. These are parts of us that have done their utmost to help us to survive until we have the resources and the presence of another to do some work on. And I think it's so important to hold that sensibility as we do that, because it's so easy. People want to get rid of those things. Oh, I don't want to be controlling anymore. I don't want to be, I want to feel. We said, no. Or I don't want to feel fear. I was working with somebody the other day who said, well, how can I stop feeling the fear? And I said, well, we have to welcome the fear in without being overwhelmed. Fear is a normal response. It's a healthy response. but we can if we invite the fear of a 7-year-old in, then a 7-year-old doesn't know how to manage fear. But actually, we do between us. So, I think that's my general response to that question.
Thanks, Julia. That's really valuable. And it reminds me of something we keep pointing toward in transpersonal coaching, which is when these defense mechanisms or parts show up in the coaching, they're grabbing our attention. So we give them attention, and we give them attention according to their age and stage of development, and seek to understand their needs. And then the conversation with the client's healthy or authentic self is about how can we meet those needs?
Absolutely.
So what are the needs of that part so that it feels held and supported and safe and becomes part of this team, the team of the whole self, so we can all play together and achieve better results, as opposed to kicking and screaming on the outskirts or in the dark corridors of consciousness, turning towards the shadows, shining light on them, and thereby integrating them, addressing the needs.
And that's where I think Richard Short's work is so helpful as well, that many of you will be familiar with. I'm sure it sounds
internal family systems.
Internal family systems. Yeah. This idea of parts, so that we can help people understand that actually a part of them feels angry, a part of them feels fear, but actually is there another part that feels very different? And we're then able to help them to differentiate this, that it's not all one thing, or there's a part who feels depressed, and what, as you said, what needs that carrying, what purpose, who's that protecting? What part is that there for? And we can then enable clients to, as you said very clearly, bring all that back into the whole sense of a working system within us, rather than one that's fragmented, because trauma is about fragmentation. Trauma is about loss of trust. Trauma is about scarcity, sense of scarcity. So it's how can we have a sense of abundance or sufficiency, that we are enough, starts with us, that we are enough in ourselves, that we can feel safe enough within ourselves, and that these fragmented parts can have a greater sense of coherence between them. That's what we're aiming for.
And coaching definitely has value to add there. Absolutely. Addressing the client's whole, authentic, healthy self to gather together these parts. And Virginia Satir spoke about having parties, understanding everybody's needs, making them feel welcome, offering them Absolutely. What they need, so that they're no longer upsetting us or anybody else. And I think coaching has so much to offer there. I'd like to turn to some questions in the chat window before more and more come and we lose some of these valuable questions. So to Henny's question now, would it be true to observe that traditionally the discipline of psychotherapy seems to have a bias toward the therapist being objective and outside of the client's experience, while transpersonal coaches intentionally accept the invitation to be in the shared space? This means we are potentially prone to triggering. Yes, so prone to the triggering of what emerges in that space. Henny, if I understand that question correctly. Yeah. So if we're prone to be triggered, how do we handle that? So it's not just my survival self or part of me that's now been activated, and I've lost my positionality as a coach, and I've succumbed to an activated part. So how do we identify if that's happening and come back into the coaching space?
Yeah, great question. It's not actually the case that all psychotherapy works in that way. It works as an objective stent. So if, there's 146 different modalities of psychotherapy registered with the UKCP, and many of them would work in the same transpersonal space as you do. And I was one of them. So it's not true that all psychotherapy, some will, but that it's not true. That's would be a differentiation with psychotherapy. So we are all prone to re-triggering, I think. It's true if you do work in a very objective way, where you know, you're objectifying the client, you're over here, they're over there, you know, I move back, we've got big space between us so that the client can't affect me too much. Of course, we're already in our survival stealth, so we've already been triggered by the whole idea of being in an intimate space with somebody. But if we are in an intimate space with somebody, then our potentiality for being triggered is always high, because intimacy, attachment trauma, not many of us have survived childhood without some attachment trauma or life experience trauma. So in an intimate space, then intimacy is potentially triggering for many of us. I think it's about what you probably already do. One is that how we prepare ourselves to go into sessions with clients, how we get ourselves into our own healthy space, or authentic self, our own fully functioning grounded space before we enter into clients with space, that we're, as far as we can, we're working in a safe space for us as well. So it's not just about a safe space for the client, but it's safe for us, and that we set that up to be safe for us. And it's not always easy to do that. I say that, and some people might think, well, of course we do that. But actually, I've supervised with a number of coaches where they have, in their effort to rescue unknown rescuing, they've ended up for it not being very safe for them. I don't mean dangerous in terms of life-threatening self. I mean emotional safety, working in right ways. So it's safe for you. And also this triggering, it is about, as I said earlier, this real connection, body, emotion, brain. So both you are absolutely attuned to your clients, and at the same time, you have an observer function that's circulating around you that is able to observe yourself and what's going on, and feed that back into your system. So it's not that it takes you away from being attuned, it's part of being attuned. This sense of, I'm attuned with myself and I can be attuned with you. And being attuned with myself means I can feel a different vibration, I can feel something happening. And if we do get triggered by clients, as I said, you know, it's how we deal with it afterwards, compassionately, and getting the support we need. And I honestly think that all of us who work in this intimate space with clients, we do need to do our own work on our own trauma and our own healing. I really do think we do, however we choose to do that. So I'm not saying everyone has to be in therapy, because there's all sorts of ways we can do that. But I really do think we have to do our own work.
Yes, and you've already stated very clearly that supervision is important for people who do this work, and we do emphasize that as our course as well. If you're doing this work professionally, you should be seeing a supervisor in a supervision group of some kind to receive that care and support.
Absolutely, to hold you in this work, and to support one's own reflective inquiry. You know, I think the best supervision is about reflective inquiry, you know, but it holds us in that space. And if we're in a group, the value of learning from and with each other in a safe, held space is also fantastic, I think. That we can be a resource to each other.
Indeed. There's a question from Olga, and it relates to one of the questions I prepared for today's session, in that we're largely living in a traumatized and traumatizing society, especially in light of what's unfolded over the last couple of years with the pandemic, and now we're witnessing an international war, that on top of the economic crisis and environmental concerns and everything else. And you know, that's the era in which we find ourselves. So if somebody's directly affected by a scenario such as something acute, let's say they're a war victim themselves, or they're being affected by what's happening in the collective, and they're in that very defensive fight-flight mode. Let's give some credit to Maslow's hierarchy, as Olga's pointing out here. They're in survival mode. It's about food, basic needs being met, are they going to be receptive to coaching? I mean, I think this kind of speaks to something we've already looked at. So if somebody's, let's say, at the bottom of the pyramid, are they coachable?
Maybe, maybe not, would be an answer. I think it really depends. I mean, I've been in groups with Thomas Hubel, who's been doing work with people in Ukraine and who are suffering, all we know. And he has done some really interesting work with him. Whether he's doing therapy or coaching, I can't tell you, but it's very simple. So I think for some, it is possible to do that. It's possible to hold people in their direct experience now. But for others, obviously, you know, if, as you say, hierarchy of needs, you know, if you're not sure where the next food's coming from, you're hyper anxious about this, that, and the other, your frontal lobe isn't operating, you know, because your vagal nerve is running riot in various ways, and your frontal lobe can't operate. And therefore, our decision making, our executive functioning isn't able to operate. But coaching can then do something about self-regulation. You know, I hear how hard it is for you. I really, you know, we can, you know, acknowledge here everything that people are dealing with. But right now, I wonder if we could just find a little place of safety together or something, however you might frame it. You know, you have your own ways of framing it. Because then we can just simply, by simply being with and simply co-regulation, breathing, offer somebody the opportunity to step back into themselves. They might not be able to take it, they might not be able to do it. That really isn't the point. The point is that we've given them that opportunity to do that if they wish it. And if they're too busy, they can't be doing it, they can't, then that's fine. We don't, you know, it's not our job to force people to step into coaching, but to offer them an invitation to step in. We have always lived in a traumatizing society, unfortunately. I mean, the society is very traumatizing. We were born into the soup of collective trauma, and the symptoms of that collective trauma is everywhere. And many of us have taken that to be normal. So we have got a real problem. But clearly at the moment, the heightened anxiety from COVID, cost of living, war, depending where people are in the country, depending on what they're dealing with, the heightened level of anxiety is high. And if people have got an earlier trauma, which most of us have, about not feeling safe, then as soon as the world comes to feel less safe, all our systems are agitated again. And we can both honour that and, you know, I mean, it's quite normal to feel anxious about what's going on in the world. It's quite normal to feel anxious about, you know, if you're in a war zone, you're going to be super anxious. You know, that's normal, that's healthy, that's your body doing what it should do to protect you, either to get out if you can, or to find a way to safety. And so we can also explore with people. So, you know, in the past, when you've been in places that felt really uncomfortable, how did you get yourself to safety? Or who offered you safety? So, you know, you can look at what resources people used to negotiate their way to safety. And not every, and sometimes it might be very, very small. It doesn't matter how small it is. The fact that they're still alive in front of you means that they negotiated a way to safety. And it's true at the moment, you know, as I indicated, I've been online with several things about the war in Ukraine, and it is desperate, and wars across the world too, of course. We shouldn't forget there's major wars still going on in Syria and across Africa and Yemen. Terrible perpetration and things going on. But I think we can't solve any of that. What we can offer is this true meeting of a attuned human being with somebody else who can witness normalize, hold, all those things. And we should never, ever undervalue that. You know, it might seem as if we're not doing much. If we can do that, we should never undervalue it.
That's so good to hear from you, Julia, because I think you've pointed rightly to the fact that we're living in a society in which most of us are traumatized, and it's just a matter of time until that becomes activated. And so there's certainly no shortage of clients for people doing this kind of work. And I believe, and this is why we emphasize it at our transpersonal coaching course too, if we can be that safe container for clients in which they feel held and heard and safe to finally come to terms with what's present for them in their life, and have somebody who's a generative listener, then we shouldn't underestimate the value of that, because that is rare. I mean, if I look around in my life at how many people, I'm blessed to know people such as these in this community, all of you with us this evening, who would be able to hold space just beautifully for somebody in crisis. If I look around the neighborhood where I live, there are not that many people who are skilled to do this. So there's work for us to be done, and we have the skills. If you can hold space for any and all types of phenomena that might arise when somebody's expressing their pain, then we have a certain responsibility, don't we, to go out and to be those facilitators, those space holders.
Well, I don't know if we have a responsibility. That sounds a bit, with a slight rescuing edge in there. So,
Yeah.
but I would say we can take this into the world and gift it to the world.
Yeah.
As long as it is healthy for us. That would be my marker on it.
Yeah, so checking in with our own personal motivation for why we want to do this work.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's healthy for us. Certainly, we have offerings that are of great value, as long as we let go of any aim to solve something. You know what I mean? You know, my job here is to solve it. Not going to work because that's a survival defense. But if it is to take myself to offer what I have to those to whom it might be valuable in a way that's healthy for me, what a gift we can give.
Indeed, it is. Now, I'd like to just raise a case to see what your response might be. Somebody in our supervision group recently raised an example of a client of hers who was not, although showing up for sessions, not making much progress in those sessions and not adhering to their commitments to certain tasks. So a reasonable amount of stagnation, little progress, coming to coaching, but not getting very far. So what might be behind that, and how should coaches respond in such situations?
Well, this is, I would say, a trauma response. So if you think trauma is about stuckness, trauma stops fluidity, stops the flow of information. And so this is somebody who is a bit split, I would say. So there's part of them that wants to change, and there's the big part of them that doesn't want to change, that is frightened of changing, terrified of it, or that we haven't really understood what these defenses are for. So whenever coaching is very stuck, that's often a trigger for coaches as well. So we have to be very careful ourselves about our responses to clients that are not progressing the way we'd like them, because we can get overactive and over attentive to that. But it is a sign, for me, it's the defensive mechanisms that are going, that it's not safe enough yet for them within or with us for them to do anything about. And it might never be. But I think what we can do is to try and break off a breaking out of this is that we can, as you were saying before, use this eye of parts. You know, I hear there's part of you that really wants to do this work. And there's another part of you that doesn't seem to want to do that. Is that how you see it? How do you make of that? What does this part have to say for us? You know, what's going on for them? Can we try and understand what's going on here for them? Would you be up for that? I mean, you'll know your clients. You know how you negotiate working with your clients. So, say, well, so what is this part around? What is it that it needs us to understand, or needs us to really pay attention to, or needs us to listen to? Or, you know, you can start exploring that in a very compassionate way, while saying, and also this other part of you that would like things to be different. What's going on for that part, you know? So again, you're inviting some exploration. Now, there'll be some clients who just can't go there because they're not ready to, and that's their right. And we should be honourable and respectful to them to do that. And we should always, as I say, and I know you would, hold it compassionately. Let's explore what's happening here. How does it feel for you to be in this position? What's it like for you? So that we can gain some idea with them, if they're interested, if that's what they want to do, to get some greater understanding. But, you know, not all clients are able to do that because of their trauma biography and how safe it feels for them in intimacy. Just may not just feel safe for them yet. But that shouldn't deny that actually some of the work we've done for them might mean that in the future they take that into another piece of work, and that actually what they've taken from the work with us has some validity in work they do in the future that we don't see. We have to believe in life, really. But I think we should never, ever, and I know you wouldn't, but it's not up for us to set the client's agenda and tell them what they should be doing and how they should be operating. So I think we work very cautiously, kindly and compassionately in that space to generate some understanding, if that's what the client is up for.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful response. One of my teachers used to say, you never know how far a change will go. Exactly. So just expect that change is happening. And some of my closing remarks with clients sometimes go along these lines of, well, you've done deep work today, and who's to know how this is going to transfer into your life.
Absolutely.
Let's stay open and curious.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you say that's so important to reinforce the courage and the commitment clients are giving to their lives and in doing what they can for themselves. And however small that is, that's all important. Absolutely. Yeah. We never know. We never know. We have to trust. We have to trust.
May as well be optimistic.
We have to trust in life. We do.
Yeah. Oh, this is really rich and wonderful. I'm wondering if anybody in the audience or in our circle here today have any questions. Feel free to unmute at this time and ask your question. It'd be good to hear from you as opposed to only reading in the chat window.
I have a question, please.
Great, Emma, thank you.
Just to go back earlier, we were talking about sometimes trauma can present itself as that numbness or that disconnect and where a client can't connect with what's really going on for them. And I just wondered if you had some advice on how to approach that situation, or how to connect with them if that's what's showing up in the session.
If the client does a client sort of voice, do you know, I feel a bit numb, I don't really know, I just feel a bit numb. Because if they do, then we can say, tell me about that numbness. Where do you feel it? Tell me all about that numbness. You know, you can start engaging some curiosity about it. Is one way. Another way is to then also say, I wonder if there's another part of you that doesn't feel quite so numb. What might they have to say? And if the client is really so numbed and dissociated, then I think you come back down to co-regulation. So, well, let's just spend a bit of time just being here together, just coming into relationship together. What's it like for you to be here with me today? What's going on as you sit there? What's coming up for you? You can bring it right back to right this moment, here and now, between the two of us, and see where that takes you as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I could keep going, but I certainly don't want to hog the mic. We've only got Julia with us for the next 20 minutes maximum. What's on your mind? Kelly?
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been so useful. I'm just wondering, there was a client that I was coaching, which I know has been kind of an emotional, traumatic past, with especially attachment. But what sometimes I find is sometimes if he feels completely things are too much going on, then he'll completely distract from what he's brought to coaching. so I can see there's like a distraction thing going on, and I'm just wondering how you would approach that, so I can just kind of support him where he's at with that, rather than at the moment I just kind of listen, then maybe draw back to maybe either what's going on for him in that moment, or bring his focus back to maybe what our intention was for this session. But I'm just wondering what you would
good
say.
Well, both of those sound good. I mean, distraction is a defensive mechanism, like denial. I'm fine, nothing's going on with me. So distraction, as have you well illustrated from how you said you've worked with it, the thing to avoid is being caught up in the distraction and following the distraction. And sometimes, I say that as if, oh, of course I'd never get. Well, we do, don't we? I mean, well, I have. Maybe it's just me, but I have. Something you just find yourself in the distraction back. But yes, bring back. So I'm here. So what about right now? What's happening to you right now? What's going on in your body right now? What are you experiencing right now? And it might be, you might say, I observed that there's, you tended to be, you're talking about something else over here, and I wondered what was going on about that, what was happening underneath that or something. So you can, if it's the sort of client that you work with like that, you can draw attention to that and say, so I'm wondering, we're back now, what might have that been about, but it depends very much on the client and how you work with them. So I'm always cautious about saying what you should do with clients, because obviously it depends so much how you will work and how you contract and your clients. So I trust that you will take anything I say, as was said at the beginning, and just relate it to how you work. But absolutely, no, you're absolutely right. That's what you do. Don't follow the distraction. Bring back to the here and now in the engagement, the relationship. And if it's possible, then to invite some exploration about what was going on. And it might be so, when you walked in here, what you were aware of as you came, so you can invite some of that exploration if it feels appropriate and the client feels open for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
And it feels so important, as you've highlighted here, Jules, that we as coaches identify the client has become distracted or whatever else, and acknowledge that, not ignore it and go, oh dear, my client's distracted. Let's get back to my script or my protocol or whatever else, but to be present to what is currently unfolding in the session and work with that.
Absolutely. That's absolutely. Because that's the only place in the immediate here and now, that's the only place we can really do any resolution. We can't do it talking about the past, talking about the future, or talking about something else. We can only do it right in the here and now.
Absolutely, thank you. I'd like to turn to Henny, one of our colleagues at LF Trust, for your question.
Julia, thank you so much. We appreciate your engaging style. I think this is a perfect example of drawing someone into a space, because you've kept us fascinated throughout the last hour. So thank you so much. In terms of trauma in coaching, to what extent do we need to explore the actual trauma? Is it necessary for the client to actually describe it in detail, or what are we looking for? My sort of sense is that we're looking for the pattern. The pattern is more important than the actual content. The process is more important than the content. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we can't, memory, let's do a bit about memory. Many of our traumatic experiences, we don't have cognitive recall for. We only have a body-based emotion, only have. The memory is emotional, body-based. All our memory has an emotional body base. Some we have a cognitive recall, and some we've made a narrative about. So, cognitive recall memory, it also becomes storified. So it's not always, it sometimes leaves out the feelings and the body things. So we don't really know. We can get some hints from somebody's biography, if they tell us some things about their autobiography, you can say, okay, yes, well, so how did you cope with that? What you meant? But really, we don't need to know. I mean, when I was doing, and I was working with therapy with trauma as a therapist, I didn't really need to know much of people's history, because it's all in front of me. As you say, it's all their patterns in front of me, how they relate to me, their behavior patterns, their fears, it's all there, and that's what we can work with. Now, for some people, it's still a surprise that what happened to them in the past has any relevance to what they're experiencing in the present. So, people are brought up to say, oh, children are resilient, they get over things, it doesn't make any difference, So sometimes it can be helpful to say, what happened there and then really happened, has an impact even when you're a very young child and you might not remember it. But so sometimes it can help people make sense of something in the here and now. But ultimately, we don't need the history. If they do tell us some history, I think the important thing is not the details of what happens, but really what impact did it have on them? What did they take away from it? How do they think that may be still resonating in them now? And it can be another way for some clients can say, well, yes, I think I'm still now this, that, and the other. But no, we don't need the history. I do think having some autobiography is helpful, but not to diagnose, because we're not diagnosticians. We should never diagnose. And we can never be sure what the traumatizing events were, because so much of it is pre-verbal. And so, but for example, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were really anxious about an operation coming up, and then just dropped in. They'd had an operation at 5. I thought, oh, what was that like? Oh, I don't remember anything about it. It's all done. So, that was an opportunity to say, well, let me try something on you. What do you think? Do you think some of the anxieties, blah, 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 blah. And, as a client, they said, oh, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So it didn't change what we do in the here and now and how we work with it, but it did help the client's understanding a bit, framing of it a bit. But it depends on the client, of course, and how you work with them. So no, I'd agree with you. We don't need the full narrative. We don't need all the fine details of what happened. But what's useful is about what happened next, who was around, who helped, who was there safe for you, how did you negotiate yourself to safety? Those things matter. And mostly then about, well, let's now bring that into here. So how does that resonate for us here? Yeah. Thank you.
Great questions. Sue, you're next.
I was working with someone and knew something of her traumatic history. And during one session, it was obvious that she was becoming dysregulated with a speech, and she was very agitated and she was talking faster and faster, and it was over. And my instinct was to invite her to come back to the body, come back to where we were, look around the room. And she shared with me that she actually felt she resented that intervention or that invitation, although she understood why I might be doing that, but she'd wanted to continue on a spiral, if you know what I mean. And although at the end of the session everything was resolved and it was productive, but I suppose my question is, if we observe somebody becoming so dysregulated, do we just hold the space and let them go through that? Or is it advisable to try and do something to intervene and in some way bring them back to stop that spiraling and going further and further into it?
Yeah, well, great question too. Really, always, I so enjoy all these conversations I have with people because they're always such great questions. It's always so great. Well, you see, if somebody's in a spiraling, the other thing about trauma, and I just pick it up here, is that most trauma is from relationship with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So that we have been perpetrated on by somebody in the past, and so we carry that dynamic within us as well. So you know, that sort of perpetration of others can also come out, as can it be a sense of being a victim when actually one isn't in that you know, in the current instance. So something, just as you were describing that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded quite a sort of bit of I don't know who you'd become for her in that instance,
Right,
for example. So I don't know, you can't, don't you? But so that's what's going through my mind about who you become for her in that instance. But I think my instinct would always be to say something like, I'm noticing that there's quite a lot of agitation around in you today, that you're actually quite, you know, all up here. Is that how it feels to you? I'm wondering how it would feel to try and bring that back down. You know, so we're sort of acknowledging what's happening and then offering to bring it back down. And if the client says, no, I don't want to do that, so that's interesting. So tell me what that's about. What's going on? In the same way, keeping regulated ourselves, our voice staying and trying to bring that back down, because it's not healthy for somebody to be in nothing gets resolved in a highly agitated state.
mm.
And obviously clients have a right to stay in an agitated state if that's where they wish to stay. It's their right to do that. But as they're in our presence, then I think we can say, I'm noticing this is happening. I'm just wondering what's going on. I'm wondering how it would be to see if we could just bring that down a bit. How would that feel? You know, we're negotiating it with the client.
Yes, okay.
About how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, they can always tell us, no, I don't want to do that, if you like. They say, oh, okay, well, let's just explore what that's about. You know, we can roll with it a bit, you know, and not then say, oh, I won't mention it again. You know, we still stay with it. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer or not, but it's a important and interesting question you've raised.
Right. Thank you. Yes, I think the key things there is about the negotiation and the exploration. I think in my with my lack of expertise, I was wanting to make it better for her. But if we'd have brought the negotiation in, then it would have been a much more gentle process.
I wouldn't necessarily label it lack of expertise. I would label it something you got caught up in it a bit. And
Yes.
we all do that at various times. So it's just a matter of, and it's great learning for all of us. So thank you for sharing it with us, because we'll have all done it. We'll have all been in a similar position. And then we can catch it and we can learn from it. So thank you so much for bringing it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Every session is an opportunity to learn. That's one of the great rewards of this work, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Matt, your question.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great, thank you. Sorry, I'm in the basement. My children are at home with COVID, and I'm just trying to navigate this a little bit right now. But I just want to know, like, want to ask you, it would seem that our intention in doing this is to help our clients. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the difference between rescuing and assisting our clients.
Another brilliant question. Is there a difference? I think. Well, I think rescuing. I started my profession as a nurse, and then I did all sorts of other things, and ultimately became an executive coach and a psychotherapist. So I used to be driven by being helpful, which is often rescuing. Okay, right. Sounds better, but actually is often rescuing. Let me be helpful to you, when actually the client necessary or person didn't really want to be helped, or that wasn't helpful. They could help themselves. You know, I didn't need to help them. They could help themselves, and that's the same with rescuing. They can save themselves. Assisting, well, of course, we have, where we're committed to support our clients. So I think obviously there would be times when we might, I'm just trying to think actually how we might assist them, but I suppose, and there might be times when I might be healthily helpful. So it's not always unhelpful, always a sort of survival response of mine. But I think the only way of knowing is to explore the edge of it within ourselves. I thought I was assisting. Let me just sit with that and be with that and see what was going on for me. What was the outcome? How did it feel with me afterwards? I think it is something that we can only really explore within ourselves to really know. Ultimately, I think if we are taking away any of the client's autonomy to decide anything for themselves, then we're in a sort of a survival place ourselves. Because in trauma also, we've had our autonomy taken away. So one thing we have to be very careful of in coaching is not to take autonomy away from our clients. And I know it's a basic fundamental of coaching, I know, but I also know often we do it. So I think it's about really exploring the edge within ourselves, which I now do with helping. Was I really helping, or was I actually being a heroic helper?
Right. Yes, so if I were to understand this correctly, it seems to be more difference in the openness to which you approach your client, as opposed to maybe being a sole director in the sense of their direction, to be more open and facilitating
absolutely
together in an open space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit removing the ego too, I would maybe expect.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. This is, sorry, please.
Go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that there's been many insightful moments throughout this discussion. And I just wanted to thank you for that. And there's been really fantastic questions all around. So it's been wonderful. And I'm so happy that I was able to manage to get on this call.
Well, you're welcome from your basement, and
yes.
May your children get better soon.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Julia, thank you also addressed Leonidas's question about when the survival self is activated and we feel called to make a difference, to do this work, and what we need to watch out for. So I think you've just spoken beautifully to that as well. Is there a difference between feeling called to be a coach, to be in this role, to do this kind of work, and being somebody whose survival self has been activated, and now we feel a certain degree of, I need to do this. If I don't, then there's some implication.
Of course. I mean, of course, if a calling to do work, can come from, in your terms, our authentic self, a soul's calling, however we want to determine it, that it's we're called to do this work. But it can also flip into the heroic rescuer. And again, we'll only know that if we sit with it within ourselves. And, even being the heroic rescuer, we can track it back and say, no, I am called, but it comes from a different place within us. I think that's the difference. So, it comes from a different place. It comes, well, I'm going here, it comes from a heart, it comes from a more place of being called to work with people in a facilitative way that we hope will be reparative in some ways, or however we mean that. But we do have to be careful, all of us in one-to-one work, whether it's any work, whether it's as a nurse, as a psychotherapist, a coach, whatever. We have to be very careful of this heroic rescuer, our shadow side of stepping in and becoming, yes, I see somebody just put entangled, and we become entangled. We get caught up in this, but it's not, because it's not healthy for us, really not healthy for us. And it won't be healthy for the clients, and it won't lead to good outcomes. So yes, we just have to sit with that for ourselves and in our own work and our own exploration.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm getting a sense, I know we're running out of time now, but the difference between trauma-informed coaching and trauma-sensitive coaching, that there's a qualitative difference there. Perhaps if you could make a last comment along those lines.
Well, I think if what I've been talking, how I've been talking with you and how I talk with coaches generally, is we're talking about most of the clients who walk through the door. So we know we've got normal distribution of sort of, but there are some coaches who work with those who got specific trauma. So people who work with survivors of domestic abuse or other sorts of trauma. And I think that just needs another level, another bit more layer of a sensitivity to understand more deeply how the trauma dynamics happen within that sort of abuse, if that's where our focus is. So I would just say that's trauma integrative is much more about where the depth, but transpersonal psychotherapy is as well, where how the work happens enables a different depth to happen just because the nature of how it's set up.
That's great. Julia, thank you so much. This has been so insightful, so illuminating. I'm sure this recording is going to be watched again and again by many in our community. We really appreciate your time and the precious information and sharing that you've given to us this evening. So thank you so much. We're out of time, everybody, but I appreciate the wonderful questions and energies you've brought to our gathering this evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jules, once again. And if you're interested in Jules's book, everybody, it really is a brilliant resource. I'm going to once again paste that information that I shared with you at the start of the session in here, where you can get a 20% discount to buy this book. It's also available on Amazon. And everything we've discussed today is touched on in this book. I definitely very highly recommend it to all of our transpersonal coaching students.
Well,
so I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you again to Jules.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jevon. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a great evening. Thank you.